Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the Tangzu Princess Chang. So this is, of course, a set that you've seen lots of pictures for, and I've posted lots of pictures on it. But yes, it is a very, very nice looking bullet-shaped set. Very nice design on the sides, the back. You actually get nice red and blue little collars around the cable, which is super handy if you try to use another bullet set that, just imprinted the letters on the little collar that's clear and you can't really see it. So kudos to them for using the big red and blue because it actually helps out quite a bit. Nozzle, it's actually, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's actually big or small, but it's a little bigger than maybe what you're expecting on a bullet set. But, more importantly is that little vent hole right there. And one of those things that seems like a really small feature until you push a bullet set into your ear and you get dry reflex or you get pressure buildup. So again, I think they made two really wise decisions on the build. The red and the blue and the vent and the cable is nice and the box is nice. And we will kind of jump into it because all that is all well and good. So I will start with, I will call this one the gifter, and I call this one the gifter because this is one of those sets that you would give to your family, give to your friends, give to your non-audio people who just say, hey, do you know any sets that are pretty good for a reasonable price? That's exactly what the Princess is. It's just an affordable set that sounds good. And what do I mean by sounds good to non-audio people? There's really nothing wrong with it. Sounds as expected for non-audio people. You just get this natural, warm, bassy, non-fatiguing, generally appealing tuning for pop music. It does that very, very well. Lesser characteristics on the gifter, things that reviewers tend to talk about. If you're into technicalities, speeds, and transients, and resolutions, and all the things that you talk about on more expensive sets, that's not what the primary goal was here. It does some of those things okay, but primarily this was a set to be, nothing sounds wrong, especially to non-audio people just getting into the hobby, looking for something easier in a hang-down style. That sounds pretty reasonable. Sounds great on pop music. That's exactly what the Princess is. If you're looking for, details and speed and sharp and analytics, that's not exactly what the Princess is. So Chang versus Ling Long, right? So KZ's Ling Long was a recent bullet set as well. I would just kind of generally say buy one and EQ to the other. And they're not all that far apart. Chang does have a vent and a bigger stage, which I think does give it an advantage. I think Ling Long, for me, I think Ling Long's without the vent, it actually does sound bassier to me when I A-B them. Right here, they don't look, Tangzu's actually looks a little bassier, but I don't know. To me, I think KZ set actually sounds bassier, but you can generally see the points at which you would EQ one to the other one. Chang, if you just wanted a little bit more sub-bass. On this one, I would actually bring Chang down to where Ling Long is or even below. And then here is sort of a major difference of where Ling Long actually pops up a little earlier. Chang pops up a little later, but stays, at this almost 5K, a little bit higher, and we'll talk about that in a bit. And then finally, out here in the upper treble, the way Chang does a really relaxed version of it, and Ling Long and other sets actually bumped up a little bit more energy there. So these are sort of your handle points of where you would start to approach tweaking one to the other one. But are they drastically different, or is one drastically better than the other one? I would say no. I would just say settle with one and then tweak the one to the other one with EQ, and you're kind of halfway there. So is it a new Sony MH755? I will thank Obi from Obi Audio. He pointed this one out this morning, and I kind of wished that I had said it because I think he's kind of spot on with this description. And why did people like the Sony MH755? For the same exact reasons. Warm, bassy, great on pop music, very approachable, affordable. You can give that to anyone who asks for a decent set, and that's what it was. Chang is right along the same lines. And actually you can see that Sony's was a little bit more bassy, and I didn't bother to A-B them, but they are liked for the same exact reasons, and you can sort of look at Chang as a modern version of it, and it's actually, I think, a cleaner version of it as well. But for me, again, it goes back to the stage. I think the stage is actually better on Chang, and for me, the stage on Chang Li is actually quite good, probably better than what other people are talking about. But again, you can kind of see the handle points to move. If you want to have the bass adjustment, you want to tweak the 2-3K, a little bit there. But again, you'll sort of notice this Tangzu Chang Li is a little bit below where Sony is. This is probably going to be one of those areas that a lot of people are going to bump up a little bit, and I will talk about that as well. So sound, like I said, generally speaking, it's got this bassy, harmonious shape that works at lower volume, but it does scale up, and you really should go there. I think it does. I think some people are listening to it probably a volume, or maybe their device doesn't go as high as it should. I think it's not hard to drive, but I think it does take on some better characteristics when it's a little bit louder, and we'll talk about that as well. So I do think it does scale up quite well, even though it is a low-cost set. If you have a desktop system or nicer DAC amp, this one will scale up with that equipment, which is actually pretty cool for a $15 set. So the bass. I do think the graph looks a bit crazy on the bass, like we just looked at. There's those, against all three of those sets, it's just a big bass. It's a big bass shelf. But in a 6mm form factor, it just doesn't have that impact and density of a 10mm at the same levels, right? So you can kind of look at this and say, yes, it is a big bass shelf, and you're going to think it's super bassy and muddy, and it's just not that because it's a 6mm. It doesn't really move the air that the 10mm is moving as well. So just a different, you have to kind of wrap your head around that and remember that's a 6mm, and it's not nearly... It's still a bassed boost level, and it sounds right for pop music. I'd say it goes deep enough into the sub bass, but again, it's just really harder for the 6mm to really do a ton of rumble. There's a lot of bass potential there, especially if you EQ or have a bass button, but I would actually go less. I'd do the opposite. I'd bring it back down, and I'll talk about that just for a little cleaner mids. But if you want to go the opposite and put in a bunch of sub bass, I did that, and it actually goes there too. So if you wanted to sound a little bit more like Ling Long, you can kind of go there as well. The mids. And again, I think Tangzu sort of hit this natural over technical, and I talked about that kind of right there. These things that we talk about on more expensive sets, you can push a dynamic driver to do those things and sort of force them to sound a little more analytical and a little sharper and make more apparent resolution. That's one style. That's not what the Princess is. The Princess is this more natural timbre, tonality, balance. It does those things much better. And I think, the Tangzu really chose right there. $15, make it a set that everyone can pick up and it sounds natural and warm. I'd say the same thing about KZ's Ling Long, both tuned in the same way that doesn't really force what isn't there. You got a 6mm driver. It's got some performance characteristics. There's no need to overdo that and try to push it to make some reviewer happy. Just put out a set that generally people are going to find appealing, and that's exactly what the Princess did. It may not have the detail and resolution and speed of the bigger brothers, but it does have that tone and timbre and balance, and it does a lot of things right just for popular music. For people who aren't in super audio fans who really worry about technicalities, this is just an easygoing, relaxed, very nice sounding set along the lines of MH55, Ling Long, even sort of Blonde 03. It's just got this bassy mids that sound about right, and a lot of it happens right there in the midsection of that tone and timbre and everything kind of sounding as natural and as you're expecting it to sound, even if you are a non-audio person. The treble, and this is sort of the area where I say it sounds a little bit better with volume. And it also hits a nitpick if you do that. So for $15, I do think the extension and the level is fine. I think they actually hit those right. But as we said, I think, it's a bit lower than some other sets at kind of the same price point, around the same curves. So I think it's just a little bit easier to hear the upper treble and stage with just a little bit more volume. Like I said, they went down, just a hair here, right? There's only a couple of decibels difference between the two. And I think couple decibel difference you could make up for pretty much with a little bit more volume, but I think this is where it becomes a little bit harder to drive. I think people aren't really pushing it, or where it seems to be hard to drive. I don't think people are pushing the volume. Just turn it up a little bit, and I think you'll actually hear some of the upper treble fall into place. I wouldn't call it hard to drive. It just seems a little hard to drive because you'll have to move your volume a little bit, but yeah, but if you turn it a little too far to the right, you can bump against that 5K area, sounding a bit too forward on tracks that really hit it hard. So again, I think this area right here, I think that the way it comes across on some older tracks and some maybe not as some unforgiving tracks and some electronic tracks, 80s metal, guitars. I noticed it on electronics. This part tends to hit your ear a little harder, and it takes on a focus away from here and not so much here, but this part just has sort of a little bit forwardness to it that I wasn't a huge fan of. But yeah, I think those sort of three, I think it throws the balance a little bit off, but it was very, very much track dependent. And like I said, on these genres, it was kind of there. But for the most part, I do think that Tangzu, again, chose really wisely. It works well on most tracks, on most genres, and that little bit is sort of noticeable on a few. And I think that's really what you want, something that generally is going to work for lots and lots of music types. And if a few people have to EQ or change their tips, then I think that's kind of okay. I do think the stage it works for me out of the box. I do think it feels really nice. It has this projected width and height, better than I was expecting at $15. But do find tracks that don't really hit the 5K hard, and you can kind of see where the stage performs really well. On Def Leppard's Animal from Drastic Symphonies, kind of a bigger open version, symphonic version of that track. Sounds very big. Go-Go Penguins, Saturnine, and what I would say to listen for is sort of the width, and then you actually get some depth behind you. It becomes a little more immersive when you're not having this 5K take some of the attention away from that, and the stage just sounds a little bigger, a little more 3D in that way. So what happens if you want to bring out a little more technical details? Like I said, this one isn't a tech beast, and it's at $15, and it's for your friends who know about tech details, but you want better playback on a track like that. Because that track actually has some pretty heavy drums that hit into the bass on Chang Li a little bit hard. So like I said, there was a few areas on Chang Li that I would tweak a little bit. And so the mid bass, I think the way it is, I think it works fine on pop music. If you want to get a little more technical and hear a little bit more details in the mids, you want to hear some more details out here, bring this down. This sort of clears out the mids, improves your clarity a little bit. Over here, like I said, and that this one is kind of iffy, and I'm not sold on what I did there, but I will tell you the reason why I did it, and it's exactly what I talked about on the treble. So this 5K bit on electronic music and on some older tracks tends to get into my ear and take too much focus. So pushing it down a little bit made the stage actually a little bit, kind of move those vocals and that bit a little bit further away, a little bit more easygoing, kind of faded back into the background so it's not as prominent or as forward. And then you can hear more of this, and you don't really need as much as this. So I wasn't sold on this for tracks that don't hit 5K. Maybe that sounds a little less detailed or not enough detailed. So yeah, not sold on that, but on tracks where you need it, I was totally sold on it. This, again, I think, as I said, I think most of the other sets that have this similar frequency bump this up a little bit, so I don't think there was that much harm in bumping that up. I think it helped a little. For me, as I said, the volume was more of an issue than actually tweaking that in EQ, but if you tend to listen at lower volumes, then do look at that. And I will put these PEQ settings in the description. But yeah, these were sort of the three handles that I would poke at to really dial in Chang Li. It's a really nice set, but it's one of those sets where I said it's the gifter. It does things very, very well. It's a really nice, easygoing set, and it really does nothing wrong. It only gets better, and these three things sort of help me get it to a better place and a little more technical. But again, it's an easygoing one. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.